Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the flickering candle-lit bedrooms of the Middle Ages, where the sheets were scratchy, the walls were cold stone, and the secrets, they were dark, terrifying, and sometimes unspeakably weird. You're lying on a straw mattress stuffed with moldy hay, trying to ignore the faint scratching of rats behind the wall. And no, that's not the wind howling. That's the family 2 doors down having their nightly prayers, arguments, or something else entirely. Because when you lived with 10 other people in one wooden room, everything was heard, and everything was hidden, badly. From the peculiar ways medieval people shared beds with strangers, to the punishments for nighttime sins, to the things you were expected to do under the covers, this isn't a history lesson you'll read in any respectable textbook. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without a good pillow and a nightlight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie back, your eyes close, but the air in your room feels heavy. You're in a medieval bedroom now, only it's not really a bedroom. The concept doesn't quite exist yet. Instead, you're in a multifunctional space that smells of damp timber sweat and cooked turnips. The bed is more of a pile coarse linen over straw, maybe a feather-stuffed bolster if you're wealthy but don't count on it. The walls are thin or non-existent. If you're poor, you're sleeping in a common room near the hearth with your entire family, and sometimes even the chickens. You wake up with soot in your lungs and someone's foot in your ribs. Privacy. That's not just rare, it's suspicious. The church warned against spending too much time alone, especially in the dark. Solitude bred sin. And so people slept communally. Siblings, parents, neighbors, apprentices, even travelers. If you visited a village and asked for shelter, you'd be welcomed into a bed with complete strangers, and you'd be expected to share the covers side by side like logs in a stack. This was called bundling. In theory, it was innocent. 2 people, sometimes even 2 unmarried lovers, might sleep in the same bed with a bundling board between them. A literal plank of wood meant to prevent any, shall we say, mingling. But wood is movable, blankets are slippy, and temptation, well, it rarely sleeps. The creakiest secret of all was that in many places, bundling was not just tolerated, it was encouraged. Especially in remote farming villages, where marriages needed to be tested before dowries were exchanged. So you'd go to a girl's house, lie beside her in bed while her parents were in the next room, or even the same one, and talk. Until morning, or until something else happened muffled under the sound of snoring. But what if you weren't courting? Well, you might still share a bed with anyone, a sick cousin, a visiting monk, a passing merchant. Beds were rare, furniture was expensive, heating was limited, and your body heat was currency. It kept people alive in winters so cold, water turned to ice indoors. And yet, even among the most practical arrangements, stories crept in. The bed was never just a bed. It was a battlefield of sins and suspicions. Demons were said to lurk in the sheets. If you went to sleep without saying your prayers, or worse, after committing some impure act, the incubus might visit you. A dark shape pressing on your chest, suffocating you, violating you. You'd wake up with your limbs numb, drenched in sweat, convinced something unholy had just slithered off the mattress and under the door. Sometimes you wouldn't wake up at all. The church told people these demons were real, sent by Satan to exploit the vulnerable hours of night, especially those who slept alone. Women were especially vulnerable, they said, because of their weaker souls. A widow grieving in her lonely bed might be visited by spirits pretending to be her dead husband. A young maiden might dream of a beautiful man only to awaken gasping, heart-pounding guilt dripping from her like candle wax. So precautions had to be taken. In some homes, holy relics were hung over the bed, tiny wooden crosses, bones of saints, even dried flowers blessed by a priest. Beds were sprinkled with holy water. Latin prayers were whispered into pillows. Parents taught their children to sleep on their right sides only because the left was the devil's side, and sleeping on it invited bad dreams. Of course, not all nightmares were imaginary. Some were horrifyingly real. Marital beds were often places of silence, not affection. Sex was a duty, not a pleasure. The church dictated when you could or couldn't do it. No Sundays, no feast days, not during Lent Advent, or if you were pregnant, menstruating, or nursing. That left a startlingly narrow window for marital relations. But even then, consent was a foreign concept. If a husband wanted to exert control, it was his right. The wife's refusal was not just disregarded, it was condemned. Her body was his property, her bedroom a place of obedience. Sometimes neighbors heard the cries. They knew, but nothing was said. And behind closed doors, if there even were doors, things happened that history rarely records. Acts that blurred the lines between sin and survival, punishment and pleasure, power and fear. Then there were the beds of kings and nobles. You might think they had it better. Lavish four-posters, velvet hangings, downy pillows. But those beds were far from private. Royal beds were political stages. Ambassadors, courtiers, even family members were often present during the monarch's rising and retiring. Imagine trying to fall asleep while your cousin watches from a velvet chair, scribbling notes about your mood. The Queen's bedchamber might house 6 ladies-in-waiting. The king might receive his ministers in bed every morning. Not metaphorically, literally under the covers. Intimacy a myth. Even childbirth happened publicly. A royal woman would labor with dozens of witnesses to ensure the child was legitimate. Her sheets would be soaked in blood, her screams muffled by music incense or whispered prayers. And when the baby came, if it came alive, it would be swaddled and held aloft like a trophy. The room smelled of pain and afterbirth. But the moment was called holy. You turn slightly now, your own sheets rustling beneath you. It's easy to forget how recent your privacy is, how radical it once was to sleep alone, to close a door, to lock it. In the Middle Ages, the door often stayed open, even if you were dying, especially if you were dying, because death, like everything else, was a communal event. But that's a tale for later. For now we remain in the darkness, in the flicker of firelight, in the hush between prayers and sin. You lie still, because tonight we're only just beginning. You haven't moved in a while now. You're lying there quiet, as if the darkness might notice. In the medieval world, the night was not just a time of rest. It was a time of danger, of transformation, of vulnerability. The sun belonged to the living, but the night that belonged to things far older, far less human. Let's go deeper, Because as the candles dimmed, other rituals began, rituals most people didn't talk about in daylight. In the cramped cottages of villagers before sleep, there was a silent understanding. If anything odd happened during the night, strange dreams, missing items, the sudden illness of a child, you did not speak of it out loud. You looked to the corners of the room where the shadows gathered and quietly blamed the fair folk, the good neighbors, the hidden people. Never the word fairies, of course. That was dangerous, too direct. They could hear you, and if they heard, they might visit. The belief was everywhere. If your shoes were turned backward, if your milk soured overnight, if you woke up with tangled hair or bruises, you couldn't explain it was them. They had come in the night, played with your body, whispered strange dreams in your ear. Some believed they stole bits of your soul piece by piece each time you dreamed too vividly. So what did people do? They covered mirrors before bed, hung iron scissors near the cradle, left out offerings, bowls of milk, bits of bread on windowsills or under beds. It was better to appease than offend, and it was never safe to sleep with your head to the north. That was where the dead came from. Speaking of the dead, medieval bedrooms were often the last place the living saw you. If you were dying, and people often were, you weren't rushed to a hospital. You stayed in your bed where everyone gathered to witness your final hours. Children were brought in, not to be protected from the sight of death, but to learn from it, to hear your last words, to watch your chest rise slower and slower until the soul slipped out. Sometimes they said you could see it happen, a faint wisp, a shimmer in the candlelight. The soul leaving through the mouth or rising from the chest, depending on who you asked. And once it was gone, the room shifted, became heavier. The silence changed shape. People wept, but only briefly. Then the rituals began. The body was washed right there in the bed. The sheets removed and burned if the death was suspicious. If it wasn't, the sheets were reused. Death was common. You couldn't afford to waste linen. Coins were placed on the eyes, not just to keep them shut, but to weigh down the spirit, prevent it from wandering. But sometimes, it wandered anyway. There were stories, hundreds of them, about people who died angry, or suddenly, or unblessed. These were the restless dead, the ones who came back, not in dreams, not in metaphor, in flesh. Revenants. The word is soft, almost romantic, but these were not gentle ghosts. These were the things that crawled from graves at night back to the beds they once slept in, back to the rooms where they took their last breaths. In Yorkshire, people whispered about a man who rose every night from his tomb, went home, and lay next to his widow. Not to haunt, just to lie there. Still, cold, watching. In some stories, the revenants came back hungry, not for food, but for breath. They'd strangle sleepers, sit on their chests, infect entire villages with plague. How did people respond? They exhumed the bodies, looked for signs: uncorrupted flesh, blood around the mouth, eyes wide open, and then they took action. Some drove stakes through the heart. Others beheaded the corpse and burned the pieces. Ashes were mixed with water and consumed by surviving family members as a cure or a curse. No one was ever quite sure. But not all returns were violent. Sometimes the dead came to finish something left undone. A promise, a warning, a kiss. One woman in 12th century France reported that her dead husband returned each night to lie in bed with her. He was cold, damp, but silent. She told the village priest who instructed her to question him. The next night she asked, "Why do you come?" His answer, "Because you never finished the prayer over my body." She finished it. He never came again. You shift slightly. The sheets rustle, maybe a little too loudly, because for a medieval sleeper, movement at night could be dangerous. Nighttime was not quiet. The world outside was alive with sound wolves howling in the woods, the creak of carts long after sundown, owls hooting thieves, whispering footsteps where there shouldn't be any. There were night watchmen in cities calling the hour, but they didn't protect you. They warned you. Stay inside. Lock the shutters. Say your prayers. Don't answer the knock at the door, because it wasn't always a person knocking. In the Welsh borders, there were tales of the midnight caller, a shadow that knocked 3 times on your window. If you answered, you vanished. If you ignored it, you might find your name written in ash by your bedside. And in Slavic Europe, the Mora came in dreams, a spirit that sat on your chest and stole your breath. Nightmares weren't just bad dreams, they were real battles for your soul. Some people tied bells to their nightcaps, hoping the sound would drive spirits away. Others stuffed garlic into their pillows. Some carved runes into the bed frame. The fear wasn't silly. It was survival. Because sleep was the most vulnerable state a human could be in. Your mouth relaxed. Your body exposed. Your defenses lowered. And people knew it. Which is why, even in peaceful villages, husbands sometimes tied their wives' ankles with linen thread before bed. A way to know if she left the room during the night, or if someone else came in. And yes, sometimes it was for suspicion of adultery. But just as often, it was fear of possession. The devil, they believed, could enter through the mouth while you slept, or through the eyes if left open. Some feared he could ride your dreams like a horse, steer them into wickedness. So certain monks taught special sleep positions, hands over, chest eyes, firmly closed, legs straight, as if mimicking death might keep the real thing away. Others slept with rosaries wrapped around their wrists, or belts of hair shirt wool prickling their skin, keeping them half awake, half punished. Pain, after all, was holy. And so were night terrors. They were seen as trials, visitations, tests of faith. If you woke screaming, sweating, unable to speak, you didn't go to a physician. You went to confession. Because sleep disorders were sins made manifest. Even sleepwalking had meaning. If someone wandered at night, eyes open, but blank, villagers might say they were being led by spirits, a wandering soul, or worse, a witch's familiar. Witches, they believed, moved through dream space, could enter homes through cracks, ride sleeping men like animals, braid nightmares into their beards. You didn't leave your door unbolted. You didn't leave milk out by accident. And you certainly didn't sleep with your feet uncovered. Because if you did, something might grab them and not let go. You stay still now, more still than before. Listening, imagining the creak of an old bed frame, the whisper of a prayer in a long dead language. Your room is safe, of course, isn't it? But the world of the Middle Ages wasn't divided between waking and dreaming the way ours is. It was all porous, blurred, sacred and profane, physical and spiritual, all sharing the same narrow bed, The night wasn't something you passed through. It was something you survived. And we're still only just getting started. You're still lying there, still listening. But the room feels different now. Heavier. Like the shadows have settled a little more thickly into the corners. Like the air itself has begun to remember something. Let's follow it. Because in the Middle Ages, the bed wasn't just a place where you risked an encounter with something sinister, it was often the source of it. Especially when it came to childbirth. You might imagine a medieval birthing chamber as something sacred or woman-centered. And in a way it was. But it was also a place where fear dripped down the walls like sweat. Where silence was sometimes enforced with superstition. Where the line between life and death thinned until it all but vanished. Picture it a wooden bed surrounded by women, midwives, mothers, neighbors. Men were not allowed. Not even the husband. The room was darkened. Curtains closed. Mirrors covered. The only light came from flickering tallow candles and perhaps the glint of a small icon of the Virgin Mary perched on a bedside stool. They called it the lying in. And the woman, your mother, your sister, maybe even you, was about to pass through something that was considered borderline supernatural. Because childbirth was a battlefield, and the outcome wasn't guaranteed. Some mothers died slowly over hours of agony. Others suddenly blood rushing like a river through straw mattresses, soaking into the floors. Still others lived, but their babies were silent blue, unmoving. And in those first few breathless seconds, 1,000 fears took root. Was the baby cursed? Was it a changeling? Had something else entered with the child? Midwives watched carefully, not just for signs of health, but for signs of the unnatural. If the baby was born with teeth, hair on its back, or a caul over its face, whispers began immediately. Superstitions swirled like incense. A child born with a caul might be a prophet, or a demon. A child born on certain feast days might grow up to be a witch, or worse, already was one. And so ancient protections kicked in. Some midwives made small cuts on the baby's heels to let the evil out. Others placed salt beneath the newborn's tongue. Tiny charms were tied to its wrist. The afterbirth, often buried beneath the threshold, acted as a seal against dark forces. But the bed itself, oh, the bed was tainted. Sheets soaked in birth blood had to be burned if the labor had gone wrong. Some believed the screams of pain summoned spirits to the room, some benign, some not. And once they were in, they lingered, sometimes for years. So people developed rituals to cleanse a bed after birth. Holy water, Latin chants, the fumigation of sulfur or burning juniper branches. You didn't want to sleep in that bed until the last trace of death or life was gone. And yet, that same bed might be used again, days later, weeks, for sleeping, for sickness, for sin. Because in most households, there was only one bed, and everything happened in it. You learn this slowly as you step deeper into the medieval bedroom. The walls are bare, the ceiling low, but the bed, it's the heart of the house. High ornate if the family's wealthy, just a straw pallet if they're not. Sometimes elevated off the ground to avoid rodents. Sometimes right on the floor with a family dog curled at the end, keeping watch. But no matter where or what it is, people feared what might follow them into it. So they told stories. Half warnings, half truths, of bed spirits that fed on lust, of demons that punished impure couples, of dreams so vivid they were said to be memories from past lives, lives where the sleeper had committed grave sins, and now centuries later, the bed was remembering for them. There were stories of people who fell asleep in their marital beds and woke up changed, speaking in tongues, coughing up small bones, bearing bruises in the shape of hands. And there were worse stories still. Of lovers found dead embraced in each other's arms, their mouths wide open, faces twisted not in pain, but in shock. Nothing stolen, no sign of entry. Just a bed that had decided, enough. You laugh it off, perhaps, in your mind. But those stories held power. So people prepared for bed the way you might prepare for battle. Washing in specific orders, crossing themselves 3 times, whispering protective verses, tucking their feet into the corners of the blanket, making sure no skin touched the air. Because exposed skin could be taken. In some parts of Europe, it was believed that witches or evil spirits could steal parts of your body if they were left uncovered during sleep. Not literally, just spiritually. You'd wake up with your hand numb, your tongue heavy, your thoughts clouded, a piece of you missing. Doctors couldn't help, but the local cunning woman could. She might place charms in your pillow, mix herbs with honey, and smear them under your tongue before sleep. Bind a lock of your hair with red thread and hide it under the mattress. She might even sit beside your bed all night, whispering the names of saints, watching the door, waiting for something to come. Because it often did. Sometimes it came in the shape of an animal. Cats were common, but they weren't always cats. Sometimes they were witches in disguise, or spirits taking animal form. A black cat curled at the foot of your bed might just be a cat. Or it might be watching your dreams, lapping up the heat of your soul. So beds were kept tidy, carefully made. Pillows fluffed and arranged with care, not for comfort, but to avoid offending the invisible. And yet, in royal households, it was all much more elaborate. The Queen's bed was an architectural masterpiece. Thick velvet drapes, embroidered silk, golden tassels. But those drapes weren't just for show. They were barriers between her and the watching world, between this world and the next. Royal women slept surrounded by attendants, not for safety, but for witness. If anything happened, if a pregnancy ended, or a ghost whispered secrets from the past, it had to be recorded, explained. There were rumors of queens waking, screaming in the night, of scribes running in to take down their ravings, of doctors summoned to check the royal pulse, the color of the tongue, the scent of the breath. Because the bed was political, and sometimes it was cursed. After a monarch died, their deathbed was often dismantled, burned, or stored away in locked vaults. It carried something now an echo, and no one wanted to sleep where a king had whispered his last regrets. Even noble beds carried stories. In one French manor, a bed was passed down through 6 generations, but each owner died childless. The local priest finally ordered it destroyed. When they pulled it apart, they found a small figurine nailed beneath the slats. A doll, bound in wire. Its face scratched blank. The bed, they said, had chosen. You pull the blankets higher now. The air is cooler. Or maybe it's just your imagination. But somewhere far back in time, a child is being born. Somewhere a lover is breathing his last. Somewhere a bed creaks, and it's not from age. The past doesn't sleep. And neither do we, not yet. You're deeper now, further from your own time than you've ever been. The quiet hum of modern life has faded completely. No streetlights, no plumbing, no glowing screens. Just the soft rasp of wind through thatched roofs, the snap of logs in a distant hearth, and the creak of the old bed you now inhabit centuries too late. But the bed is not empty. Not really. Tonight it carries memory, stories, and stains that were never fully washed out. Let's talk about sex. Not the romantic kind. Not even the pleasurable kind. But the kind the medieval world didn't quite know how to handle. Because back then, sex didn't belong to you. It belonged to the church. The church decided when, how, and with whom you could share your body, and even then, under very strict terms. Sex was for procreation, only in marriage, only in specific positions, and only on certain days. The church calendar had over 100 days a year when sex was forbidden. Sundays, Fridays, feast days, Lent, Advent, the eve of communion, which meant in theory most people were abstinent more often than not. But reality was never so tidy, so the bedroom became a battlefield of guilt. Newlyweds were advised to pray before sex. Some were told to avoid eye contact, to lie still, to think of their duty rather than desire. Passion was dangerous. It meant you were enjoying yourself, and enjoyment meant sin. If you climaxed too easily, a sign of weakness. If you didn't, perhaps you were already damned. Confessors heard everything. Women whispered their shame into wooden booths, unsure if they had sinned simply by wanting their husbands. Men worried they had spilled seed unlawfully, even in sleep. Wet dreams were considered demonic visitations, sometimes even proof that the devil had seduced you in your dreams. Monks and priests wrote entire guides on how to sleep properly, physically, mentally, spiritually. And yet, in the dark, desire didn't care. Not about holy days. Not about fear. People snuck into each other's beds. In peasant homes where everyone shared a single sleeping space, lovers learned to move silently. Quiet fumblings under patchy linen, while siblings pretended not to hear. In castles, nobles used secret passages literally called lovers' stairs to reach each other's rooms without waking the household. But secret love had consequences. If a woman became pregnant outside of wedlock, she might be hidden away, or accused of being a seductress, or worse, of being bewitched. Because witchcraft, too, began in the bedroom, so they said. Let's imagine it. A man wakes up, his body aching, dreams still clinging to his skin. He remembers warmth, eyes in the dark, and shame. The next morning, his limbs are heavy, his appetite gone. He begins to weaken day by day. The conclusion, he has been ridden by a witch. In many regions, this was a common belief. Witches were said to steal vitality by riding men in their sleep. Not physically, spiritually. Their spirits would leave their bodies and visit the beds of those they envied or desired. They left no marks except a sense of violation, a hollowing out. Men who suffered these attacks were said to have mare-pressed dreams, nightmares, a word we still use today. Women, too, were targeted or accused. If a woman slept too well, or too restlessly, or had fits during the night, it was said she'd been visited by a spirit, or had become one herself. Some slept with hands tied, ankles bound in wool, knives placed under the bed. Iron was believed to repel dark forces, so rusty keys were often hidden in pillows. Not for protection, but as a warning. If they were disturbed by morning, you knew something had been there. And if you woke with scratches, don't ask, just pray. Witchcraft wasn't the only fear, of course. There was also jealousy. In noble households where alliances were forged in bed, love was a luxury no one could afford. Marriages were arranged, dowries exchanged, titles merged. And yet the heart was not so easily commanded. So secret affairs bloomed, affairs that carried terrible risks. A lady's maid might pass messages. A stable boy might scale the wall. But if they were discovered, if the wrong person found out, what happened next usually happened in bed. Some were smothered with pillows, some poisoned. Some woke to find armed men standing over them, holding torches, demanding names. The bedchamber was a place of punishment as often as it was pleasure. Take the chastity bed. In some noble households, newly married couples were locked into their rooms by witnesses, sometimes even their parents. The guests would wait outside the door, listening for sounds of consummation. Not for titillation, but for confirmation. Because if a marriage wasn't consummated, it could be annulled. Dowries returned, alliances undone. So people waited, listened. If the couple was silent, they were questioned the next morning. If the sheets showed no blood, questions turned to accusations. And if a man failed to perform, that wasn't just embarrassing. It was a legal issue. Men accused of impotence had to prove their virility in court. Literally. Sometimes they were forced to attempt intercourse in front of witnesses, or submit to examinations by doctors and priests, or even carry out their duty with another woman, often a midwife or noble appointed assistant, to prove the issue was with the wife, not him. These were called trial by Congress. It wasn't private, it wasn't consensual, and it wasn't rare. Sex wasn't about love. It was about property, lineage, power. And the bed recorded everything. The creak of old wood, the hush of breath, the way a mattress sagged in the middle. All of it told stories, and some beds told too much. So they were destroyed. In some towns, a bed associated with scandal was dismantled and burned in the square. The act was public, symbolic, a cleansing of sin. But in other places, the beds remained, silent, stained, waiting for the next body to lie down, for the next story to begin. And then there were the beds of punishment. In certain dungeons, prisoners were given a bed not of straw, but of iron, a slab too short to lie straight, too narrow to curl into. You couldn't sleep. You could only doze briefly until your back spasmed or your neck throbbed. These were called discipline beds. They were used not to rest the body, but to break it. In monasteries, monks sometimes built their own beds from stone or rough timber as acts of penance. Some scattered nettles in the sheets. Others never lay down at all. They slept standing, leaning against a wall, bound at the waist with rope. Sleep to them was indulgence. Pain was closer to God. And even in noble homes, discomfort was embraced. Some aristocrats used beds of cold brass in the summer, believing it cooled their humors. Others refused mattresses altogether during Lent, opting for boards covered in burlap as a sign of repentance. Beds weren't for comfort. They were for control of the body, the soul, the story. And the stories, as you're learning, never really end. They just shift shape, You lie there now, silent, somewhere in between centuries. You feel the weight of history thick as woolen blankets. You imagine the breath of another beside you, someone long gone. You imagine what they saw, what they feared, and still you don't move, because there's more. There's always more. The room is colder now, not just from nightfall, but from something else. Something ancient and watchful that seems to stir every time another secret is spoken. You've wandered so far into the medieval world that you've forgotten what a soft mattress feels like. You barely remember what silence means without whispers underneath it. But we're not turning back yet, because there's still one bedroom you haven't visited, the sick bed. And once you enter it, you might not leave. In the Middle Ages, getting sick meant more than discomfort. It meant exposure, not just to pain, but to judgment. Disease wasn't merely physical, it was moral. People believed illness came from sin. If your body was suffering, your soul was probably guilty. So when you were confined to bed, fevered, pale, too weak to stand, the first person summoned wasn't always a healer. It was often a priest, because your soul might be leaving soon. Medieval sickbeds were less about recovery and more about preparation. The bed was no longer just furniture. It became a stage for your reckoning. A final confession booth cloaked in linen and sweat. If you were lucky, someone brought a relic to your bedside, maybe a saint's bone or a scrap of cloth believed to carry divine protection. Candles were lit. Family gathered. Children watched. The bed itself groaned with secrets. You see a dying person, sometimes confessed more than they ever had in life. Secrets that had festered for decades. Adultery, blasphemy, theft, betrayal. Names whispered that were never meant to be heard. Entire sins emptied into the mattress. Some sheets were burned after death, not for cleanliness, but to erase the past, to keep a shameful confession from spreading, as if the linen itself could remember. But what if the sickbed didn't end in death? What if the illness passed? Well, that didn't always mean you were safe. People feared the recovered almost as much as the dying, because not everyone returned alone. It was believed that souls wandered during sickness. Fever dreams weren't just hallucinations, they were the spirit drifting, looking for answers. And sometimes it brought things back with it. People who survived near death would often wake changed. They spoke with strange accents. They remembered places they had never been. Some wept at odd moments. Others screamed at night, shouting names no one recognized. Were they still themselves? That question lingered in every room where someone had almost died. In villages, neighbors watched the recently recovered closely. Was their appetite the same? Did they walk differently? Did animals avoid them now? A man who had once been kind might return bitter. A woman known for song might now speak only in mutters. And so some were tested. The local healer might place blessed salt on the forehead, a charm under the pillow. If the sleeper reacted, twitched, sweated, screamed, it was taken as a sign that something had followed them back, that their soul had changed shape. So rooms were salted, beds dismantled, sleep was monitored for days. Because if the spirit had been replaced, if something darker now lay in that bed, you needed to know before it rose. And then, of course, there were the dreams. Always the dreams. You couldn't escape them, especially during illness. And people didn't treat dreams as nonsense. They treated them as prophecy. In the medieval world, dreams were messages, sometimes divine, sometimes demonic. If you dreamed of fire, it could mean a nearby sin had grown too large. If you dreamed of water, it might mean death. But dream interpretation wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic. Nobles kept dream books under their pillows, books that offered long lists of meanings. A goat might mean treachery. A broken bed frame might mean lost fortune. Blood could mean childbirth or murder depending on its color and flow. And if your dream was particularly strange, you told someone. Dreams were often treated as legal testimony. If a noble dreamed that their servant was stealing, it could lead to a real investigation. If a widow dreamed her husband was murdered, the accused might be tried, even executed. One woman in 13th century England claimed to see her dead husband in a dream, pointing to a box beneath the bed. Inside, a pouch of stolen coins. Her son-in-law was arrested. No witnesses, no confession, just a dream. So when someone told you, "I dreamed about you last night," you didn't smile. You braced yourself, because the dream world was binding, and it wasn't always confined to sleep. Let's talk about sleep paralysis. It wasn't called that, of course, but it was known. Waking in the dark, unable to move, a crushing weight on the chest, a presence in the room. Medieval people called it the mare or hag riding, a witch, a demon, a ghost pressing into your body, stealing your breath. They believed it was punishment, or a warning, or a test. You might have confessed the next day, or performed penance, or asked the local wise woman to smudge your bed with smoke from herbs, mugwort, sage, or yarrow. You might change sleeping positions. Sleep facing east, or place a bowl of blessed water under your bed to trap the spirit before it reached you, because the worst cases, the ones that didn't wake, were said to be people who answered. In their paralysis, they heard whispers, temptations, questions. Do you want to be free? Will you give me your name? If they responded, if they consented, they never woke again. Their bodies breathed, but their souls were gone. Taken. You shift now. You don't mean to, but you do. The covers pulled tight across your chest. You remind yourself this is just a story, but in the Middle Ages there was no just. Everything mattered, even your name. Let's go there next. Because names in the medieval bedroom carried terrifying weight. Children weren't always named at birth. Some weren't named at all until days later after they'd survived the first few nights. The belief was that a name gave the child a soul. Until then, they were between worlds, neither fully here nor gone, which meant if the child died before being named, it was a ghost without a name, and nameless ghosts were restless. They couldn't be prayed for, couldn't be spoken of, couldn't be laid to rest. So they lingered. Some mothers whispered names to their dying babies just in case. Secret names. Names not shared aloud, in hopes that the child would find peace or find their way home in the next life. But those same secret names were dangerous if misused. Say it aloud at the wrong moment at midnight by an open window, and you might invite them back. There were cases of women waking in the middle of the night to find their beds damp, blankets rustling with no wind, the sensation of a small body curling beside them. But when they looked, nothing, only the impression in the straw, the faint scent of milk, and an unbearable grief. So people kept silent, not from ignorance, but from knowing too much. The bed, after all, didn't forget. It remembered every fevered dream, every name whispered too late, every tear soaked into a pillow. You lie there now, heart slow, eyes heavy. The stories cling to you soft as linen, and the past breathes with you, not gone, just waiting. Still awake, or maybe just between worlds, like they used to say. Between waking and dreaming, body and soul, the living and the nearly forgotten. You don't have to decide. Not yet. Because in the Middle Ages, this was the hour things crossed over. Tonight your bed is a portal, the blanket a shroud, the air a veil between centuries. Let's lift it again. Let's talk about punishment. Because not all beds in the medieval world were meant for rest. Some were built to hurt, and some weren't built at all, just spaces designated as beds where no one would ever close their eyes willingly. Let's start with the bed of penance. In monasteries across Europe, monks who broke their vows were sometimes sentenced to sleep on cold stone slabs. No hay, no blanket. Sometimes not even clothing. Just bare skin against freezing stone night after night until the body stiffened and the spirit begged for forgiveness. The punishment wasn't always official. Sometimes it was chosen. A monk might do it voluntarily to purge impure thoughts, or to imitate Christ. Pain was holy after all, and sleep, that was indulgence. But the practice wasn't limited to monks. Lay people sometimes made their children sleep on the floor if they lied, or on thorns if they disobeyed. Some parents placed small children in dark corners beside the hearth, wrapped in ash-covered blankets, so the soot would scare the devil out. It was called bed correction, and it was almost always done in silence. No shouting, no smacking, just exile from the warmth of the bed. And in noble households, punishments were more elaborate. There's one recorded tale of a woman in a French court whose husband believed she had mocked him behind closed doors. He ordered her tied to the bed for 3 days, no food, no comfort, just whispered prayers and a single cup of vinegar left by the bedside. He called it repentance. The servants called it routine. Because in castles, bedchambers weren't private. They were arenas of power. If a nobleman wanted to disgrace his wife, he didn't do it in court. He did it in bed. He took away her pillow, refused her a fire, moved her to a servant's mattress. There's even a record of a noblewoman whose canopied bed was lowered to the floor as punishment, literally fallen from grace. She had to sleep among the dogs, and everyone knew it. Then there were the public beds. Not brothels, not yet. We'll get to those. These were hospital beds, or what passed for hospitals. Large cold halls lined with pallets. Dozens of sick, wounded, and dying sharing the same space. There was no privacy, no curtain, no separation between a man with a broken leg and a woman coughing up blood. They were called beds of mercy, but they didn't always feel merciful. The staff were overworked, the priests exhausted, and death was constant. People died in shifts, sheets soaked through, mattresses burned weekly, candles burned day and night to mask the smell. But the worst part you might recover, only to find yourself watched. Because sometimes they said the ones who died didn't leave. They stayed curled in empty beds, silent, waiting. Some nurses claimed to see outlines in the blankets, like someone had just been lying there, though the bed had been vacant for days. Others found damp indentations on pillows, or worse, new patients assigned to a bed would wake screaming, swearing someone had been sitting on their chest all night. Eventually, some beds were avoided altogether, left unoccupied, blessed again and again, until the stories faded, until another desperate soul filled the space. Let's turn now to the brothel beds. Yes, they existed. Yes, they were many. And no, they weren't what you think. Brothels in the Middle Ages weren't dens of silk and velvet. Most were damp wooden buildings on the outskirts of town near the slaughterhouses and tanneries. The smell alone was enough to sicken you. Inside the beds were nothing more than platforms, sometimes straw-filled sacks, sometimes just cloth over planks. But the stories those beds held, they weren't just stories of pleasure or sin. They were stories of survival. Many of the women were orphans, widows, runaways. Some had been accused of witchcraft and found protection in the only place that didn't ask questions. But the rooms still whispered, especially after midnight. One woman reported waking in her bed to find her client no longer breathing, not murdered, just still, eyes open, mouth ajar, dead. The physician who arrived later said he had been dead before entering the room, so what then had lain with her? Others told stories of shadowy figures paying for a night, but never leaving. Beds that creaked long after the room was empty. Clients who looked perfectly normal until the candlelight caught their reflection in a cracked mirror and revealed nothing at all. Ghosts visited brothels. Maybe they always had. Lonely, desperate, still seeking warmth even in death. And then there were the cleansing rituals. When a bed was believed to be cursed either from death sickness or sin, it had to be purified. Holy water was sprinkled. Herbs were burned. Priests muttered prayers while circling the bed 3 times counterclockwise. In one village, it was customary to sprinkle crushed eggshells under the mattress. The belief that if a restless spirit tried to return to its sleeping place, it would step on the shells and be startled back into the afterlife. There's a story of a family whose daughter died in her bed after weeks of fever. They cleansed the room, burned the sheets, said the prayers. But for nights afterward, her mother swore she felt the indentation of a body beside her. One night she left out a bowl of milk. The next morning it was empty. No one else in the house drank it. No one else had entered the room. No one alive anyway. And some beds didn't need spirits. Some beds were cursed from the beginning, built from the wood of a tree struck by lightning, or made from beams taken from a ship that had sunk, or crafted by hands that whispered old words, words not found in any church. These were beds that caused sickness, that gave you dreams you couldn't wake from, that made you hear voices you didn't recognize, but somehow understood. So people learned to check. They knocked on the bed frame before lying down. Not for luck, but for listening. They watched how cats reacted to the corners of the mattress. They checked under the bed before sleep. Not for monsters, but for eyes. Because some believed that spirits, if banished from the bed, still lingered beneath it. Close, hungry, forgotten. You're breathing slower now, but you haven't moved. Maybe you're afraid to. Maybe part of you wants to stay here in this flickering past, where every creak might be a footstep, where every breath might not be your own. It's okay. That's what the medieval world did. It made people aware of their bodies, their souls, their beds, their fears. And now, it's doing the same to you. Sleep, they said, was the little death. But maybe death was just a longer sleep. and maybe the bed is where the two finally meet. Something shifts. You're still here, but the room feels older. The wood beneath your back groans like it remembers every body that's lain on it, every sin, every silence. The walls breathe with stories that were never meant to be told aloud. But we're going to tell them anyway, because now we've reached the part of the medieval bedroom where the secrets get too close, where beds weren't just shared with family or lovers or spirits. They were shared with strangers. Let's begin with the concept of the hostel bed. You're traveling, maybe a pilgrim on your way to Canterbury or Compostela. You stop at a tavern or inn, exhausted your feet, blistered your cloak, damp from rain. You pay for a night's rest. But there's a catch. You're not getting a room. You're not even getting a bed to yourself. You're getting half a bed. Sometimes just a corner. And the person next to you could be anyone. A farmer, a merchant, a criminal, a carrier of plague. There was no such thing as personal space. No clean linens, no guarantees. If you were lucky, the person beside you slept quietly. If you weren't, they whispered in their sleep, or groaned, or didn't sleep at all. Some snored so loudly it echoed. Others twitched. Some reached for you in the dark, mistaking you for someone else. And if you shifted away, they shifted closer, because warmth was precious, and loneliness was worse. That was the idea behind bedfellows. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't even unusual. It was simply how people survived. Records exist of bishops sharing beds with young scribes, of knights sleeping beside each other on campaign, of strangers curled against each other in the corner of barns. In fact, sharing a bed with a peer was considered a sign of trust. Brotherhood, a physical bond that echoed spiritual loyalty. But not always. There were tales spoken low in taverns and on shadowy roads of people who weren't really people. Men who seemed too still, too cold, who never blinked, never shifted. One traveler spoke of waking beside a man whose breathing never changed, all night. A man who left no indentation on the straw, no smell. When he awoke at dawn, the man was gone. The door had never opened. No one else had seen him arrive. The innkeeper later confessed that bed's been empty for 10 years. The idea of bedfellows extended beyond the living. Some people reported waking to find themselves holding a cold hand. Their own hand wrapped tight around fingers too long, too rigid. They'd yank away in shock, but find no one there. Others felt pressure beside them, the warmth of a body, even the rise and fall of breath. But the bed was visibly empty. What do you do when you've been held all night by something that isn't there? You pray, and you don't talk about it again. Sometimes people shared beds with the dead, unknowingly. In times of plague or war, whole families might sleep beside a loved one who had already passed their body still warm, thinking they were resting, thinking they would rise. They didn't, and neither did the others. Entire households found dead in the morning. A single bed with 5 bodies, blankets soaked in fever sweat, eyes glassy, skin blotched black. But let's not go too far down that path. Not yet. Let's shift to something colder. The chamber pot. Yes, we're going there. Because the medieval bedroom was not a pristine candlelit sanctuary. It was functional. And part of that function meant relieving yourself, in the same room where you slept, sometimes under the bed, sometimes next to it. The smell, you got used to it, or you didn't. Many people kept chamber pots beneath the mattress, a warm, sloshing bowl of human waste waiting until morning. Servants were expected to empty them daily, but in some households that didn't happen for days. In winter, the contents froze. In summer, they festered. And in some cases, they spilled. Accidents happened. A misstep in the dark. A visitor who didn't know where not to walk. There are medieval letters written by nobles no less complaining about guests who kicked over the pot and ruined the bedding. But the chamber pot wasn't always just a toilet. It was in some stories a trap. In one region of Bavaria, it was believed that malicious spirits could be caught if they entered a chamber pot during the night. You'd seal the pot with a lid at dawn, whispering a prayer over the rim. Then bury it at a crossroads. Others told stories of spirits emerging from the pot, especially if the person had sinned before sleep. The contents were seen as spiritual waste as much as physical. Impure dreams, forbidden thoughts. A monk once wrote of hearing whispers from under his bed after midnight. He lit a candle, looked. The pot was empty, but the words it spoke haunted him until his death. Now let's move back to the family bed. The most crowded bed of all. Forget your fluffy queen-size mattress. This was a single hay-filled sack where parents, children, and sometimes grandparents all slept pressed together for warmth. You didn't have your own pillow. You didn't even have your own blanket. You were assigned a place. The baby near the mother. The elder against the wall. The youngest siblings between adults kept safe by bodies on either side. But that safety was illusion. Infant mortality was high. Babies suffocated, often accidentally smothered in the night. There are church records filled with parents begging forgiveness, sobbing that they didn't mean to roll over, that they hadn't even known. One father said he dreamed of drowning and woke to find his baby blue and silent beneath him. Some families hung bells above the bed. If they heard ringing at night, they checked the child. Others tied infants to the bedpost with soft cloth so they couldn't slip beneath blankets. It was desperate, crude, but it was all they had. And sometimes even that wasn't enough. Children told stories of things that crept between the sleepers. Not rats, not dreams. Things with hands too smooth, faces too blank. A presence that lay beside them unmoving. It never touched. It never breathed, but it watched. And when morning came, it was gone. And the child had changed. Quieter, colder, refusing to speak. The parents would whisper, sob, maybe it was a changeling. Maybe the real child was taken, and this was something else. The bed became a battleground again. This time not between desire and duty, but between belief and dread. So they turned to superstition. Nails driven into the bed frame. Salt poured in the corners. A comb placed beneath the pillow spirits, it was said, couldn't resist counting the teeth and would be distracted until sunrise. But you had to be quiet about it. You never admitted fear out loud, because fear had power. Say a name too clearly and it might come. Ask the wrong question and you might get an answer. In your bed, at night. You're quieter now. The stories are starting to wrap around you layer by layer like threadbare sheets tucked under your chin. And still there's more. Because the creepiest part of the medieval bedroom isn't what you see. It's what you almost see. What you almost feel. That breath on the back of your neck. That footstep when everyone else is asleep. That second heartbeat in a room where only one person lies. Still. Listening. Waiting. The bed creaks again. Only you haven't moved. Isn't that funny? The air hasn't changed. The candle is still flickering, and yet something in the room feels a little closer, a little more interested. That's how the medieval mind worked too. Because once you accepted that the bedroom was a sacred, terrifying place where souls slipped out during sleep, where spirits clung to the walls, where your name might be whispered back to you from the darkness, you began to notice things. Small things. Like the way the shadow at the foot of the bed didn't quite line up with the furniture. Or the way your dreams started to feel like memories. Or how sometimes when you slept alone, you woke up feeling like you'd had company. And maybe you had. Tonight, we return to the sacred, to the holy, to the divine, to the fact that even saints had nightmares. Because religion wasn't just about angels. It was about fighting demons, especially in the places where you were weakest. And the bed was enemy territory. You see, medieval Christianity taught that the devil didn't come to you in the streets. He came when you were vulnerable, quiet, alone in bed. Or not alone, but ashamed. That was when temptation struck. That was when visions came. And saints wrote about it in detail. One abbess described being pinned to her straw mattress by a presence made of smoke. She could not cry out. She could not move. The room was thick with a sweetness she couldn't explain. It wasn't pleasant. It was wrong. Cloying. Rotten beneath the perfume. She believed it was a demon in disguise. A test. She passed barely, but many didn't. Temptation in dreams was considered spiritual warfare. Monks were taught to wake at the first sign of carnal stirring and plunge their hands into cold water. Some slept in partial sitting positions to avoid polluted rest. Others lashed themselves before sleep, hoping that pain would keep them righteous. Because every night brought battle, and the enemy came disguised. Not just as sin, but as comfort. A beautiful figure beside you in bed, a hand brushing yours, a soft voice in your ear. These were signs, lures, tests. If you responded, the devil had you. And then came the stories of succubi and incubi. Dark spirits said to seduce sleepers. A succubus female would visit men, draw out their essence, and leave them drained. An incubus male would press down on women, filling them with terrible dreams, and sometimes more. In some tales, children born of these unions were cursed, marked. Witches, demons, or changelings. Even some real children, those with deformities or unusual features, were accused of being the offspring of an incubus. One woman accused of birthing such a child claimed she never saw the father, only dreamed of drowning in a warm black ocean. Woke up wet. Months later, the baby was born with 6 fingers and eyes that never blinked. The church exorcised both mother and child, but the stories didn't stop. They never do. Some believed you could ward off the incubus with iron under the bed, garlic over the door, or a rosary tied around your neck. But others said that if the demon liked you, none of that mattered. It would return, again and again and again, so people begged for help. And that's where bedside exorcisms came in. Yes, they happened. Not just in haunted homes or graveyards, but in bedrooms, late at night, candles flickering, a priest seated by the bed, a body writhing beneath the covers. Strange words spoken in unnatural voices. Not Latin, not any known language. Some victims tore at their sheets. Others vomited black bile. Some levitated. Some convulsed. Some just stared. Vacant. Still. Smiling too wide. There are dozens of recorded exorcisms in medieval Europe. Many involved the bed. The bed was where the devil entered. The bed was where the fight would end. Or not. Because some beds remained cursed. Afterward, they were stripped, scrubbed, burned. But sometimes that wasn't enough. In one town in Spain, a girl was exorcised 3 times in the same bed. Each time the demon was cast out. Each time it returned. The bed was finally dismantled and buried at the edge of the village. Crosses were carved into every plank. A bell was hung from the tree above it. If it rang on its own, they said the demon had come back. It rang once, then never again. But no one dared dig it up, and even the wealthiest weren't safe. In royal courts, there were rumors of enchanted beds, gifts from foreign enemies cursed by hidden spells. One nobleman received a bed from an Eastern embassy. Silk sheets, mahogany frame, gold-trimmed pillows. He slept in it once, never spoke again. They said his dreams had been stolen. He walked, he ate, he nodded at courtiers. But his soul never woke up. The bed was burned, but the man lived on hollow-eyed until his final breath. No one ever found his voice. Let's drift now to death rituals once more, because some beds became sacred after death. Deathbeds weren't thrown away. They were venerated. The sheets a saint died on might be cut into tiny strips worn in lockets or placed beneath other people's pillows for protection. It was believed that holiness clung to fabric, that a blessed death left an imprint. But not all those imprints were good. If a sinner died unconfessed, their bed might become an object of fear. A woman once died mid-sin, caught with her lover, struck by lightning, both of them gone before they could repent. Their bed caught fire the next night. No one touched the room after that. The walls blackened, the floor warped, but the bed frame remained. They said you could still smell burning flesh centuries later. But the church wasn't always interested in fear. It also offered comfort. You could buy special pillows stuffed with blessed herbs, lavender, sage, rosemary, said to bring peaceful dreams, or help guide your soul gently out when the time came. Parents put them under children's heads during fevers. Lovers gave them to each other before travel. And yes, sometimes they worked, but sometimes the dreams got worse. And then came the whispers about sleeping drafts, potions, elixirs, drinks that promised restful sleep but were also used to keep people quiet, submissive, forgetful. Wives gave them to angry husbands. Maids slipped them into noblemen's wine. Some said the potions opened a door in your mind, and something else slipped in before it closed. One monk wrote of a draught that caused visions of flame and teeth. He stopped administering it after 3 patients leapt from their beds and tried to dig through the stone floor, screaming that something was beneath them. He never said what, only that they died with bloodied hands and cracked nails. You turn now, just slightly, not because you're afraid, but because the bed suddenly feels occupied. You know it's not. Of course it's not. But the feeling lingers that someone or something is lying back to back with you, breathing in rhythm, dreaming your dreams, listening, and still we're not done. The bed holds more. It always does. The dark has changed again. It's heavier now, isn't it? Not suffocating, just dense like velvet pulled over your eyes. You're still breathing slowly, still lying still. But part of you knows we've crossed a threshold. You're deep enough now that the stories aren't just about others. They're beginning to settle into your bed. Tonight, we arrive at the final sleep, the one everyone feared. Not just death, but dying in the wrong way. Because in the Middle Ages, how you died mattered. Where you died mattered. And worst of all, who you became afterward. Let's start with the unshriven dead. To be unshriven meant to die without confession. No last rites. No absolution. Your soul trapped. Your body suspect. People feared that dying without confession turned you into something not quite gone. Something caught between the grave and the hearth. A sleeper who couldn't fully rest. So if someone died suddenly in their bed without a priest, without prayer, the bedroom itself became cursed. It had heard the final thoughts. It had absorbed the unfinished sin. And it might speak again. So beds were sometimes abandoned after unexpected deaths. Left exactly as they were. Sheets stained, pillows still dented from the weight of a head now missing. Locked rooms, shuttered windows. No one entered. Because if the soul hadn't left cleanly, it might still be there. The signs were subtle. A breeze with no source. A pressure in the mattress as though someone had just risen. The scent of breath sour and recent in a room long closed. And sometimes things moved. Not thrown, not violent. Just shifted. A candle tipped. A sheet folded. A pillow slightly indented every night in the same spot. So families began rituals. If someone died badly, they placed a coin beneath the mattress wrapped in scripture. They left bread on the floor. They whispered, "Go to your rest. Go to your peace," and they hoped the bed would listen. But some didn't. Some couldn't. Because not everyone who rose from a medieval bed was supposed to. Let's talk about the revenants again. Only this time not as distant folklore, but as something that terrified entire villages into action. A revenant wasn't just a ghost. It was a corpse that moved. A dead person who came back, flesh intact, eyes open, hunger in their chest. And their origin was often traced to the bed they died in. You see, it was believed that if someone was consumed by rage, envy, or unresolved desire, when they died, the bed held their energy, held it like a sponge. And if the right conditions were met, a dark night, a storm, an open window, that energy returned. There are records from Yorkshire and Eastern Europe of graves being exhumed after villagers claimed they saw the dead walking again. In one case, a man was said to appear in his former home every night at the same hour, standing silently beside his widow's bed. She swore she never saw him move, only appear, only watch. Until one night she screamed, and he was gone. The town dug up his body. It was perfectly preserved. His mouth was full of blood. His pillow, still in the house, was burned immediately. And they swore they heard a sigh as the flames caught. From that night on, her bed remained cold, empty, safe. But she never slept in it again. Because revenants didn't need doors. They returned through memory, through regret, through dreams, and through the same linen that had cradled their death. Let's move gently now toward the idea of bedside apparitions. Not spirits, not demons, just the scene. Figures that appeared beside the bed in the darkest part of night. Sometimes they were loved ones. A mother who had died in childbirth. A child lost to fever. A brother buried with sword still in hand. They would stand quietly beside the bed. Never speak. Never blink. Just watch. People said it wasn't frightening at first. It felt like comfort, until they tried to move, to speak, to touch. And the figure remained unchanged, and the room got colder, and the body in the bed began to feel weightless, as if the visitor was waiting to take them somewhere. That's when people realized what they were seeing. Not a ghost, a summoner. Not come to haunt. Come to collect. So they closed their eyes, turned away, pretended to sleep. Because if you pretended hard enough, maybe death would walk past you. Maybe it would move on. Maybe. Now let's drift briefly to something stranger. The dream swap. A lesser-known belief, but one that plagued monasteries and remote villages alike. It was said that if two people slept too closely together, touching, breathing in unison, they could exchange dreams, or worse, minds. Stories told of lovers who woke in each other's bodies, siblings who took on each other's memories, a monk who, after sharing a bed with a troubled novice, began to mutter unfamiliar names in his sleep and couldn't stop. People called it dream shadowing, so precautions were taken. No sleeping face to face, no touching hands, and never sleep with your forehead pressed to another's. That was how the spirits crossed. And finally, tonight, we come to the empty bed ritual, perhaps the eeriest of all. When someone died far from home on pilgrimage in war and exile, their family sometimes made a bed for them anyway. They prepared the sheets, fluffed the pillow, lit a candle at the foot. And every night they said the person's name aloud. Just once. Not as a call, but as a reminder. And sometimes, just sometimes, the candle flickered. The sheets dented. The bed shifted, and the family knew they had returned just long enough to say goodbye. No one ever used that bed again. It was left untouched for generations, not out of fear, out of respect. Because the beds of the Middle Ages were witnesses to birth, to sin, to visions, to death. They listened. They remembered. And sometimes they spoke back. Your room is quiet now, but the silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've heard. Everything the bed has seen. And we've only just entered the darkest hours of night. So stay still. Because the next breath you feel on your neck might not be yours. The hour is late. This is when the fire burns lowest, when footsteps on stone echo longer than they should, when even brave knights and pious monks felt something tighten in their chests, not from fear exactly, but from knowing that fear was appropriate. You're still wrapped in your blankets, motionless, and that's good. You're learning the rhythm of medieval survival, because the more still you are, the less likely anything notices you, and you want to stay unnoticed tonight, because we've reached the point where the bedroom begins to remember, where the bed itself becomes the archive. Let's talk about haunted heirlooms. Beds were expensive, heavy hand-carved, crafted from oak or walnut. They were passed down through generations like titles or land, and with them came memories, and sometimes more than memories. There were entire families who whispered about a bad bed, never openly, of course. Just a comment here, a hesitant glance there. They knew which bed took something from everyone who slept in it. They knew the smell of that wood, the way the headboard creaked like a voice that was always about to speak. One lord in 14th century England kept a 4-poster bed that had belonged to his grandfather. Massive black with age carved with hunting scenes. 4 of his children died in it before their 10th birthdays. His wife refused to enter the room. The priest who came to bless it fell sick for a week. Fever dreams muttering nonsense. Eventually, the bed was dismantled, but they never ruined it. They buried it in pieces, because even fire they feared might not cleanse it. Other heirloom beds didn't kill, they spoke. One woman claimed her inherited bed whispered lullabies in a voice she didn't recognize. Gentle female, always the same melody. She thought it was beautiful until it started humming even when she was awake. Another man reported hearing breathing under his mattress. Not rats, not wind, just breath. Slow, steady, not his. He stuffed straw beneath it, nailed the frame to the floor, slept on the floorboards for weeks. The bed still breathed, so he sold it. And months later, the buyer sent a letter. Did you forget to tell me it comes with a ghost? Some beds came with conditions. One from Normandy was engraved with a Latin phrase. If thou lie with lies, thou shalt never rise. The woman who inherited it ignored the warning. She lied to her husband, took a lover. That night she woke paralyzed, tongue heavy, limbs leaden. Her lover gone, disappeared, vanished from town. The husband found her weeping on the mattress, unable to explain why her arms wouldn't move. The paralysis lasted 3 days, and when it lifted, she never spoke again. Some said it was a stroke. Others knew better. Let's shift to beds of hospitality. You'd think these would be the safest. After all, they were meant for guests, for generosity, for welcome. But sometimes the guest brought trouble. In parts of rural France and Italy, there were tales of cursed visitors, strangers who left something behind in the bed. Not an item, not lice, something spiritual, a heaviness, an echo. A shape beneath the sheets that returned long after they were gone. One family hosted a traveler who never gave his name. He paid in gold, ate little, spoke less, slept in the attic bed. After he left, they noticed things. A sag in the mattress, a strange wetness at the headboard, a smell like soil and iron. Their daughter slept in that bed the following week. She woke screaming every night. Same time. Same words. He's here. In the pillow. He's watching me from inside the pillow. They burned it all. Even the bed frame. And still, she whispered in her sleep to someone no one else could see. Now let's descend further to monastic dormitories. Rows of beds identical, lined like teeth. Each monk had his place, each soul a cell. But even in these sacred spaces, darkness crept. One monastery near the Rhine told of a bed that no monk would keep. Every night, whoever slept there saw the same dream, a river of blood, a hand reaching from beneath the water, a name whispered 3 times. No one recognized the name, but they all heard it. And when the abbot finally investigated, he discovered the bed had once belonged to a monk who had taken his own life, something forbidden, something damning. The bed had never been cleansed, so they dragged it into the chapel, doused it in holy water, chanted for hours. The next night, the dreams stopped, but the bed was never used again. Let's turn now to bride beds, because weddings too were deeply tied to beds. In noble households, the bed was the proof of union. After the ceremony, the couple was escorted to the bedchamber by friends and family. The doors weren't always closed, or if they were ears, remained pressed to the wood. They needed to hear the consummation, or see the bloodied sheet afterward. If there was no blood, the bride might be examined, the husband questioned, the marriage annulled. In some cultures, the sheet was displayed hung from a window or paraded through the village. If it was stained, there was cheering. If it wasn't, there was silence. And in that silence, doubt took root. Whispers, accusations. Some brides faked it using chicken blood animal guts. Some never had the chance. A marriage bed could become a bed of shame or revenge. There's a record of a noblewoman who, accused of being barren, poisoned her husband in the very bed they were married in. When servants found the body, she was gone. So was the bloodied sheet. Only the bed remained. 1 mattress, 2 fates, and a silence that echoed for years. You feel it now, don't you? That silence, the kind that knows things, that has listened to too much, that carries the weight of vows and sins and screams muffled in goose down. Because these beds weren't just for sleeping. They were for secrets, some good, most not. And now, your own bed has become part of the story. It's been listening too, absorbing each tale, each whisper, each cold breath that passed across your cheek. Don't worry, you're safe. Probably. But if you feel something shift beneath you tonight, just a little, it's probably nothing. Just the weight of memory, of centuries, of the bed remembering your name. You're still lying there, aren't you? Good. You've gotten used to the stillness, to the hush that comes when the world forgets to breathe. You've been patient, listening while the medieval night unspools around you, slow, smoky, and full of memory. And now we descend into the rituals, because by now you know that nothing in the medieval bedroom was simple. Not sleep, not sex, not death, not dreams, and certainly not protection. You see, people didn't just fear what might happen in the night, they prepared for it. Every bed, no matter how humble or grand, had its defenses. Against spirits, against curses, against the creeping fingers of things that slipped in after dark. Let's start with the bed blessings. In devout households, it was common to bless the bed before entering it. Not just with prayer, but with movement. A precise ritual. First, open the sheets. Second, cross yourself. Third, walk around the bed once clockwise, whispering the names of the archangels. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. Each name placed in a corner like an invisible guard. Then you'd knock 3 times on the headboard. Why? To wake the bed. So it knew you were the one lying down, not someone else, not something else. The belief was simple. If the bed recognized you, it would protect you. If it didn't, you were on your own. Children were taught this early, especially those prone to nightmares, especially those who talked in their sleep or whose eyes fluttered open at strange hours unfocused. Parents would whisper to the bed, "Keep this one safe. Do not let them go." And if the child dreamed of fire or spoke in languages they'd never learned, the bed was blamed. It had let something in. Then came the countermeasures. Iron nails in the bed frame, dried herbs stuffed inside pillows, marjoram rue vervin, a tiny crucifix tied beneath the mattress. Some families embroidered protective phrases into the linens, words no one said aloud. Latin sometimes, older, darker tongues other times. One popular phrase was "Dormio sed vigilat cor meum." I sleep, but my heart keeps watch. Sewn in red thread always. Never black, never white, just red, for life, for blood, for warning. In noble households, protection became theatrical. Elaborate bed curtains embroidered with saints, angels, or scenes from the Bible. Canopies painted on the underside, so when you looked up before sleep, the last thing you saw was heaven. Unless the painter had a sense of humor or a secret. Some beds had hidden messages carved into their frames. One English noble's bed read, "He watches who should not." No one knew who carved it, but the bed was sold after his death. His son refused to sleep in it. The servants refused to touch it. Eventually it was left in a locked room, the door barred, the window nailed shut. People said they still heard knocking. 3 times, just after midnight. Let's move now to divination, because beds weren't just a place of fear. They were a place of revelation. In parts of Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, there were rituals meant to summon visions in sleep. Want to know who you'll marry? Clap on a slice of rye bread. Want to see the future? Place your shoes in an L shape beside the bed. Want to dream of a lost loved one? Turn your pillow inside out, place rosemary beneath your tongue, and speak their name as the candle goes out. But the rules were strict. No looking back after you lie down. No speaking until dawn. No crossing your arms or legs because it would tangle the vision. And if you saw someone standing at the foot of your bed in your dream, silent, unmoving, that meant death for you or someone close. So people learned to wake before the figure arrived, if they could. One woman recorded her own ritual in a diary. She would place a bowl of milk at her bedside, a mirror on the floor, a silver ring on her finger. Each object meant something: nourishment, reflection, commitment. And if the dream turned dark, she would break the mirror when she woke, to trap the dream inside. Some said that worked. Others weren't so sure. Let's drift gently now toward bedroom visitations. Not demons, not ghosts, but saints. Yes, saints. The church believed that the holy sometimes visited sleepers not in dreams, but in spirit. A warmth that covered the body, a light that filled the room without a candle, a hand on the forehead soft as breath. Many believed these were blessings, miracles. But not all visitations were welcome. One nun wrote of being visited by a glorious figure clothed in light, only to find herself waking every night thereafter with bleeding palms. Stigmata, they said. She disagreed. She claimed it was punishment. She refused to say for what. Another monk reported a vision of Saint Benedict. The saint stood over his bed, whispering scripture. But the monk said the words didn't sound holy. They hissed, twisted, changed shape. He woke to find his bed sheets torn, the pages of his prayer book blackened. He was moved to another cell. The bed was burned. It screamed as it burned, or so the story goes. And now we arrive at the Watchers, not spirits, not saints, not even ghosts, just presences. People told stories of waking and seeing someone standing at the edge of the room, not doing anything, just standing, watching. Sometimes it was a child, sometimes a woman in rags, sometimes a man with no eyes. They never moved. They never spoke. If you closed your eyes and reopened them, they were gone. But the feeling lingered, like a question unanswered, a promise broken, and always the sense that they'd been waiting for you to wake up. One friar told of a figure he saw every night for a year. Same spot, same stance. Until one night it was gone. He missed it. Then he found out his brother had died far away in another country. The same night, the Watcher disappeared. He never saw it again. But he kept the bed, slept in it until his death. And the next monk assigned to his cell woke screaming the very first night. He said he felt someone breathing on his eyelids, soft, patient, personal. You don't need to open your eyes. It's not your room. Not really. But the stories linger, like heat, like cold, like something in between. So you lie still. Because tonight is not for moving. Tonight is for listening. And we're not through. The bed has more to say. By now, the silence has settled into your bones. It no longer feels like absence, it feels like company. Quiet company. The kind that doesn't breathe, or shift, or make itself known. The kind that only ever watches. This was the silence medieval sleepers knew well. The kind you didn't break unless you had to. Because once broken, you could never be sure what else might hear. Tonight, the stories get stranger. Let's begin with the wandering sleeper. We'd call it sleepwalking. They didn't. In the Middle Ages, it was called spirit walking, or in some parts, moon chasing. And it wasn't a medical curiosity. It was a sign, a warning. A person who rose from their bed in the night, eyes wide and glassy, was suspected of being touched by something other. Some believed the soul slipped free and wandered while the body simply followed. Others believed it was the devil leading you, dangling nightmares like keys in the dark. There are stories of people who climbed towers in their sleep, walked into rivers, whispered in Latin they had never learned. One boy walked through 3 villages barefoot and was found outside a monastery gate crying. He couldn't remember his name. And then there were the ones who didn't come back. They left their beds. And that was that, so people devised protections. A string of bells around the ankle. A bowl of ash by the bedside, any footprints would reveal a journey. Some tied a small coin to the sleeper's wrist, attached to the bed frame with red thread. If the thread was broken in the morning, you had wandered, and you were watched more closely from then on. Now shift with me to something quieter. The listening bed. This was no metaphor. There were beds said to hear confessions, not to eavesdrop, but to collect, a kind of spiritual storage. A woman might cry herself to sleep whispering regrets into the pillow. A child might murmur apologies to God. A dying man might gasp out his final secrets into the fabric, and the bed absorbed it. That was the belief. It held the guilt, the shame, the sorrow, and it kept it. Some even said that if you lay in one of these beds, you'd hear it. Not as voices exactly, but as pressure. Dreams. The feeling of someone else's emotion moving through your chest. There's a story of a traveling merchant who slept in a stranger's house and woke up weeping. He didn't know why. Couldn't stop. The host later told him, "My mother died in that bed, praying for forgiveness. She never got it." The merchant left before dawn and never returned. These beds weren't haunted. They were haunted by feeling, by memory that had nowhere else to go. Let's look now at mirror beds. Yes, they existed, though not in the way you think. Mirrors were rare, precious, often small and warped, but in some noble households they were built into the bed canopy, not for vanity, for watching. You see, sleep was dangerous, so a mirror above the bed let you keep one eye open symbolically, if not literally. It reflected any spirits that might approach, any shadows that didn't belong. But mirrors had their own rules. You couldn't sleep facing one. You couldn't look into it after midnight. And you never, ever left it uncovered during a thunderstorm. Lightning, they said, could strike through a mirror. Not just physically, but spiritually. It could break the soul's reflection. And without your reflection, you might never wake properly again. There's a tale from Prague of a woman who did just that, left her bed mirror uncovered during a storm. The next day, her face was gone from every reflective surface. Not blurred, not obscured, just gone. She wore a veil the rest of her life and refused to sleep under anything but wool. No glass, no silver, no shine. Then there were the weighted beds, used in monasteries, sometimes in prisons, sometimes in noble households. These beds were designed to pin you in place, not for comfort, for control. Heavy blankets, thick ropes at the edges, mattresses so dense they left no room to shift. Some believed this prevented sleepwalking. Others believed it kept the soul tethered to the body, because they whispered if you floated too far in dreams, something else might float back in. One knight swore by his weighted bed, said it saved him. Every time he slept on lighter bedding, he dreamed of drowning, woke choking, gasping, certain that something had been trying to drag him out. But under the heavy quilts, silence. He slept in peace, until one night he removed them. No one knows why. He was found dead in the morning, face calm, body cold, bed perfectly made. Only his boots were wet, as if he'd stepped in something during the night. Now follow me to scented beds, because medieval people believed smell was sacred, a bridge between realms. So they perfumed their pillows with crushed herbs, lavender, clove, rosemary, not just for comfort, but for protection. Each scent had a meaning. Lavender for peace, rosemary for memory, mugwort to ward off nightmares. But the herbs had to be fresh. If they rotted, the meaning inverted. Lavender brought sorrow. Rosemary brought regret. Mugwort opened doors. One widow in southern Italy kept a sachet of herbs beneath her pillow. When her dreams turned violent blood wolves' voices she didn't know, she took the bag to a local wise woman. They opened it. Inside worms, mold, and a single black feather that hadn't been there before. They burned it all, and still the dreams got worse. She stopped sleeping in a bed entirely, slept in a chair by the fire, until the fire went out. That was the last night anyone saw her. Now let's pause, just for a breath, because this is where it gets personal. This is where the medieval belief in haunted bedrooms bleeds into our own. We still whisper stories of the cold spot on the mattress, the unexplained shadow on the wall, the dream that feels like a warning, the weight on your chest when you wake too suddenly, the knowing deep down that the bed remembers. And maybe you felt it too. Maybe even tonight. But you're safe. The stories are old. The spirits are far away. Still, if your bed feels heavier tomorrow morning, if your dreams are unusually vivid, if you hear a name in your sleep you don't recognize, don't worry. It's probably nothing. Just the past shifting its weight, settling in beside you, waiting for the next story to begin. The air is still, but not because the night is calm. It's the kind of stillness that comes when even the wind doesn't want to pass too close, when the shadows stop flickering, when the stories start to speak without needing to be told. And you, wrapped up and unmoving, are exactly where you need to be. Because tonight we reach the heart of the medieval bed. Not just its frame, not its mattress, but its function as a portal, a gate. Let's talk about sleep as travel. Because in the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't passive. It wasn't just a place you visited, it was a vehicle. There was a widespread belief that sleep allowed the soul to leave the body. Not metaphorically, literally. When you slept, your soul rose gently from your chest and wandered the world. Sometimes heaven, sometimes hell, sometimes something in between. And the bed was the launch point. That's why so much energy went into the sleep environment. The arrangement of limbs, the cleanliness of sheets, the scent of the room, the position of the bed itself. North to south was dangerous. West to east was preferred. Because if your soul didn't know where it had started, it might not find its way back. Some sleepers tied a thin string around their wrist, affixed to the bedpost, not to keep the body still, but to help pull the soul home. A leash of sorts, a tether, just in case. There's a tale of a young novice who fell into a coma after sleeping in a strange guest bed. The monastery he stayed in had once been the site of a fire dozens dead, their remains buried under the foundations. When he finally woke, he spoke of dreams filled with screaming, of running through dark corridors that bled smoke, of hands grabbing his ankles, begging him not to leave. He never recovered. He didn't die. But he never spoke again. Only hummed. The same note. Over and over. As if his soul hadn't quite made it all the way back. Now let's look at soul substitution. A darker variation. You go to sleep. Your soul leaves, but something else climbs in. A spirit, a shadow, an echo. It's not possession exactly. It's replacement. You look the same, speak the same, But your dreams are full of language you've never learned. You forget your mother's name. You avoid sunlight mirrors holy water. People begin to whisper. The priest is called. The bed is burned. And you are never quite the same again. This is why some people refuse to sleep alone. Why they placed relics beneath their pillows. Why they rubbed holy oil on their temples before bed. To keep the body closed. To make it uninviting. Because once a spirit found a body it liked, it rarely left quietly. And if it stayed too long, it forgot it didn't belong there. Let's move now to dream contagion. It wasn't just sickness that spread. It was dreams. One person in a household would begin dreaming of fire, then another, then a third, until the whole family was waking in cold sweat, whispering the same names, describing the same figures, reciting the same phrases word for word. It was believed that dreams could infect, especially if you shared a bed, or slept under the same roof, or walked barefoot across the same stone floor. Some blamed witches, others believed the dreams came from the house itself, from the bed, from the walls, from the wood. Because wood absorbs, that's what they said. It drinks memory, holds sound, remembers pain. If someone had died badly in a bed, unshriven, unrepentant, screaming, it left an imprint. Not just a haunting, a pattern, a kind of echo waiting to fall onto the next sleeper like a shroud. You'd lie down feeling fine. You'd wake up changed, eyes sunken, skin pale, mouth full of someone else's words. A woman in Poland reportedly began to dream in a dialect from 2 regions away, one she'd never heard before. She started speaking in her sleep, muttering names of people who had died a generation earlier. When her family burned the bed, the dreams stopped. But the language never left her. She spoke it until the day she died. And even then, no one understood the last thing she said. Let's move to bedroom echoes. These weren't ghosts. These were repeats. Moments that happened again and again, always at the same hour, always the same way. A candle tipping, a door creaking, a whisper in the left ear. Every night, unchanging, like a song the house couldn't stop singing. They weren't interactive. They didn't respond. They just happened, and always near beds. Why? Because beds are still, and memory likes stillness. So it nestles into the quietest part of the home and plays its record over and over, waiting for someone to hear. And when you do hear it, it changes, just a little. A whisper that pauses, a creak that waits. A door that opens a second wider than the night before. That's when the echo becomes something else. That's when it notices you. So don't react. Don't speak. Let it play. Let it pass. Now let's touch briefly on night visitors with names. You weren't supposed to know their names. But if you did, they were yours forever. Some believed that if a spirit visited you in sleep and you asked its name and it answered, that was a contract. You were marked forever. And if you shared the name with another, they became marked too. The spirit could visit them, could climb into their dreams. So families kept such names secret. Mothers wrote them on parchment and burned them. Fathers buried them under the house. Children were never told, except once. A boy in Bruges whispered a name to his sister. That night they both woke screaming and never spoke again. Let's pause. You've been so still, so good. Your bed right now is safe. You're warm. Your breath is steady. But think just for a moment about all the beds that weren't. The ones in burned-out houses, in plague-ridden towns, in abbeys that fell to ruin. They're out there still, or parts of them. A nail in a beam, a plank reused in someone's floor, a mattress repurposed, resold, recovered. What if yours holds a scrap, just one corner of cloth, one splinter of wood? Is that enough? Would it carry a memory? Would it carry a name? You feel your pillow differently now. You listen harder to the silence. Because silence in these stories has always been a language. And the bed is fluent. Something stirs. Not in your room, not exactly, but just beyond it. Like a breeze moving through the memory of stone. Like footsteps not meant for now. You don't flinch. You don't speak. You've learned better than that. You're part of the story now. And we're almost at the end. But before we get there, we need to visit the part of the medieval bed most people try to forget. The deathbed promise. In the Middle Ages, a dying person often made a final request from bed, a vow extracted with fading breath, sometimes a message, sometimes an oath, and always something that bound the living to the dead. You didn't break a deathbed promise, not unless you wanted company in the dark. One widow swore to never remarry. She did. Her second husband died suddenly, in bed. No illness, no wound, just silence, and a faint imprint beside him on the mattress, as if someone else had lain there watching, waiting. Another man promised to bury his father with a specific pendant. He forgot. 2 nights later, he found the pendant on his pillow. Wet, cold, coated in dust that didn't belong. He kept the promise the next day and never spoke of it again. You see, the dying held power. Their words echoed louder. Their wishes carried weight. And the bed where those words were spoken remembered every syllable. Let's drift now towards something even stranger. Shared deaths. There were reports, rare but chilling, of people dying in pairs. 2 people in the same bed, neither sick, neither old. One dies in the night, the other is found beside them. Breathless. Heart stopped. Nothing wrong. Except proximity. It was called soul slipping. The idea that one soul on its way out could take another with it. Accidentally. Or out of longing. Or revenge. One tale speaks of twin sisters who argued constantly. One died in bed after cursing the other. The next morning, both were gone. Their beds undisturbed, their hands clasped beneath the sheets, and in plague times the bed became a battlefield. The Black Death changed everything. People fled their homes, abandoned their sick, burned mattresses in the streets, but others stayed. Shared beds even while fever burned the skin, out of love or desperation. Or faith. They thought their closeness would save them, but it didn't. There are stories of families lying in bed, hand in hand, reciting prayers, coughing blood. One by one, the voices stopped, but sometimes, not all the voices were accounted for. When survivors returned to plague-struck homes, they found the beds still made, still warm, still whispering, as if the prayers had kept going, as if the bed refused to accept that its work was done. And when they slept in those beds, the dreams were not their own. They dreamed of dying, of lungs full of ash, of mothers calling out names they never knew. Beds were burned, rooms sealed, walls torn down. But some dreams are immune to fire. Now let's visit the midwife's bed, a strange and sacred place. Midwives were both revered and feared. They knew too much, saw too much. Some said they carried secrets in their bones. When they gave birth themselves, they often insisted on sleeping alone, or surrounded by charms, knotted strings, birthing spoons, wax figures hidden in pillowcases, because they knew what could go wrong, not just in the body, in the spirit. One midwife swore that her bed tried to strangle her, not the sheets, the bed. She said it tightened around her like arms. She said she heard it whispering, asking her to trade places. She never had children after that, never slept lying down again. She died sitting upright in a chair, rosary clutched so tightly, the beads cut into her palm. And then, of course, there were the beds of the forgotten. Prisoners, servants, orphans, people who died quietly without witnesses, without funerals. Their beds were often left untouched. No one wanted them, so they stayed. Rotting in abandoned rooms, mildew gathering in the corners, spiders building cities in the canopy. But sometimes people wandered in, out of curiosity, or desperation, or because they were called. There's a story from a convent that fell into ruin after a fire. Years later, a traveler passed through, took shelter in what had once been a novice's dormitory, found a bed, still intact. He slept in it, and dreamed of a girl in white humming softly. When he woke, his hair was braided. His feet were black with ash. He never told anyone what he saw, but he shaved his head the next day and joined a monastery. They say he never slept in a bed again. And now we reach one of the strangest beliefs of all, the bed that chooses you. In some traditions, it was believed that certain beds called people, not out of danger, not even out of malice, but out of recognition, as if it had known you before, as if it had waited. These were beds that felt right, even if they were in houses you'd never visited, even if they were centuries old. People would lie down and feel familiarity, a sense of return. But the danger you might never want to leave. Some claimed they couldn't sleep anywhere else after that. Hotels, friends' houses, even their own homes. Nothing compared. So they came back, again and again, until the bed took them, not in death, not exactly, but in forgetting. They'd sleep longer each night, speak less, begin to dream with their eyes open, begin to forget their own names. And then one night, they simply stayed. The bed would be found empty, neat, undisturbed, as if no one had slept there at all. But the smell of lavender would linger, and a pillow would be warm, and no one would speak of it. Because some beds didn't just remember, they collected, like pressed flowers, or whispers, or you. Almost. Almost. But not yet. You're still here, still breathing, still safe. The bed knows you're not ready, not quite. But it's listening. It always is. So here we are. You've made it to the edge. The last chapter. The final curtain drawn on the medieval bedchamber. And yet, somehow it doesn't feel like an ending, does it? Not when the air is still thick with breath that isn't yours. Not when the stories feel close enough to touch. Not when the bed beneath you creaks as if it's just remembered something it meant to tell you. So listen closely. Because tonight we enter the most mysterious part of the medieval bed. The place it took you. Not physically, not spiritually, but between the two. There was a word for it. In-betweenness. The bed was a liminal space, a threshold. And people believed that if you fell asleep at the wrong moment, between prayers, between bell tolls, between sundown and true dark, you could be caught there. Not fully dreaming, not fully awake. Stuck. People who woke in this state said they felt folded, bent sideways in time, a second behind the rest of the world. Their eyes saw what wasn't there. Their hands reached for things that hadn't yet happened. They couldn't be touched, only spoken to, carefully, softly, and never by name, because names in that state were binding. Say someone's name while they're in between, and you might pull them too far to one side, the wrong side. They wouldn't wake the same. They'd know things and forget others. One monk wrote of a brother who entered that state. When he woke, he no longer recognized Latin, but spoke Greek fluently, though he had never studied. He forgot his prayers, but remembered the names of every person buried under the chapel floor. He would speak them aloud at night, alphabetically, until the day he stopped. And so they moved his bed and burned the sheets, and the room was never used again. But no one forgot the sound of his voice, or how the air in that room never quite warmed again. Now shift with me gently into legacy, because if beds held memory, they also carried meaning. A bed was inheritance, symbol, curse, promise. When kings died, their deathbeds were broken down, not sold, not kept, destroyed, so their spirits would not linger, so their final regrets would not cling to the wood. But some refused. Some beds were hidden, locked away, in chapels, in caves, in walls. You can still find records of sealed rooms in abbeys and manor houses, stone chambers no wider than a bed, no windows, no doors, just bricked-off alcoves. They're called prayer cells in the archives, but some say they weren't for praying. They were for keeping something in. A bed, a memory, a sleeper who never woke. There's one in northern England. The monks claimed it was a storage room, but travelers swore they heard singing from inside. Soft, female, and in a language no one could place. The singing always stopped just before dawn. Let's leave that room now and go back to yours. Because you've been holding all this, haven't you? Carrying centuries in your breath. Lying still through ghosts and dreams and beds that knew too much. And now your own bed feels heavier. Not worse, just older. Like it's been part of this story the whole time. And maybe it has. Maybe the sheet remembers your sweat. Maybe the pillow listens to your sighs. Maybe the mattress presses gently beneath you in just the right way, not because it's shaped that way, but because you are. Because you've been here before. Because beds like stories cycle. They return. So sleep carefully tonight. Speak kindly to the space around you. And if you wake to find a corner of your blanket folded over, or a name whispered softly, or a warm spot where no one was lying, don't panic. Just close your eyes, turn your face to the wall, and say, "Not tonight." And maybe, just maybe, the bed will listen. You made it. You really did. And now the bed feels different. Not heavier, not colder, just quieter. You've drifted through whispers and shadows, saints and sinners, sleepers who never woke, and beds that breathed like lungs. You've listened without moving. You've let every story rest on your chest like a blanket. And now the stories are fading, like candlelight behind closed eyes, like the echo of a bell too distant to hear clearly anymore. Your breath is the only sound that matters now. Steady, soft, still yours. There are no watchers at the edge of your bed. No spirits creeping in under the frame. No silent figures in corners. Just the quiet hum of your room. The rustle of the sheets. The heartbeat that's been keeping you safe the whole time. Whatever came through the cracks in these stories didn't stay. Because you've been respectful, still, patient. And that matters. So let the mattress cradle you. Let your pillow remember only comfort. Let your dreams be your own. Tonight you are safe. And in the morning, this will all feel distant. A half-remembered tale you once heard on a quiet night. Exactly the way it's supposed to be.